Hello, welcome back to the ASEAN Breakfast Call. And now we're moving on to our session with Arlene Tan, who is one of the participants, our delegation from Malaysia to the ASEAN People's Forum that was held in Myanmar from the 21st to the 23rd of March. Just recently, yeah? So, hi Arlene. Thank you for being with us today.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So tell us, what is the ASEAN People's Forum about?
Well, the ASEAN People's Forum is a gathering of civil society organization within the Southeast Asian region to discuss about and also to share about human rights violation and human rights issue within the region. It is an independent forum on its own, and this year in Myanmar, the government is the government of Myanmar is the key host for the ASEAN People's Forum. Another thing that I would like to add about the ASEAN People's Forum, as in like the history, it has been quite a few years, and it started back, I think in Thailand, if I'm not mistaken, the first time. So it is a way on the civil society organization perspective on the human rights issue and on issues related to ASEAN. Usually it will be hosted prior to the ASEAN Summit.
So this is the civil society version of the ASEAN Summit.
Yeah, I would guess so.
I would have to say that it's pretty impressive. I mean, the amount of materials that Arlene brought to me this morning on what happened on the ASEAN People's Forum, because I thought that is really, really interesting. Well, maybe because both of us are IR students.
Yeah.
It's just really exciting times for us. We were just thinking about, wow, there are real development that's going on, real progress that's going on in the region, and a lot of different actors and non-state actors are working towards achieving better democracy for all of the ASEAN countries.
Yeah.
And I think more than 3,000 delegates attended this time.
Yeah, there were a lot of delegates, but from Malaysia itself, I think there were like around 15 delegates coming from various different civil society organization in Malaysia.
Right, so could you share us some stories of what went on in the ASEAN People's Forum?
In the ASEAN People's Forum, on the first day itself was the plenaries, and a lot of the discussion focused more on the ASEAN region, as in like how effective it is as a regional bloc in terms of trying to face globalization and the two superpowers, China and the US, and there were a lot of discussions also on Myanmar transition towards democracy. On the second day, the focus was much more on the workshops. There were 36 different workshops focusing on different issues coming, for example, on the LGBT issues, on freedom of religion, on farmers' land rights, on ASEAN economic growth, even youth, and so forth. What is interesting about the workshop is what is interesting about the workshop is there's just there are many people coming from all the different Southeast Asian region, representing different organizations, different rights, and a lot of networking happening at that time. But one thing that I do need to highlight is a lot of the participants coming from the region of Vietnam, Laos, and so forth. They have to conceal their identity and use a different name because of the in terms of the way. In terms of this country, the way the government handled the civil society is actually quite harsh. On the last day, all these the ideas and recommendation coming from the workshop were being drafted and discussed and reviewed, and the ASEAN People's Forum declaration statement were formulated on the last day.
Right, I'm particularly curious about that second day. Like, what do you mean by identity having to be concealed? And also, even if they do conceal their identities, there's no stopping of government officials who are present in the ASEAN People's Forum from knowing who they are. And what kind of punishment, if there is any, that they would face?
As far as I know, for example, countries like Laos and Vietnam, they don't recognize civil society organization, and a lot of them, they have, since this is the ASEAN People's Forum, they have to assume a different a different name, and in that case, I would say that in terms of how open certain government in Southeast Asia is accepting civil society organization is still very much limited. Some civil society organization from this country, they discuss on issues that what their government has violated in terms of the human rights practices. So this is one of the reasons they have to conceal their identity.
So what do you think are some interesting things that happened there?
Interesting things. I would say there were comments from participants that I know that actually not very positive comments, as in like even though the ASEAN People's Forum is something that that civil society organization can say that, oh, this is our space to voice our as in like voicing out what are the human rights violation and practices happen within the Southeast Asian region. But also we need to understand that coming from an international relation background, it is also being seen as a positive branding for the Myanmar government, and the Myanmar government might leverage the ASEAN People's Forum to show that they are transit towards democracy, and they are accepting human rights as part of their government agenda. But in actuality, the implementation in terms of trying to curb the human rights practices is still very much weak, as in like very, very weak.
So I think that this also jives into the criticism of the AICHR in general.
Yeah, AICHR, we call it ICHR. A lot in one of the workshop in the ASEAN People's Forum is about reviewing ICHR and its processes. Even though ICHR is a huge step by the government, as in like a huge positive step by the government in this very slow process to set up a human rights body, but at the same time we can't help it to sort of see it as not being effective. One of the speakers during the workshop mentioned a very interesting fact. If you want to judge whether ICHR has been effective in the Southeast Asian region, is to see how many human rights violation cases they have solved. And the answer is 0. They have solved none. And it reflected in the ability to influence government in Southeast Asia itself. And besides that, there were even claims that were coming from one of the speakers and also the public that ICHR could be the weakest human rights instrument ever adopted in the world. So this is a huge area that ASEAN or Southeast Asian countries need to look hard into.
Yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, like for example, the ICHR in Malaysia is made out of the government attorney generals, and you're talking about people who often prosecute human rights offenders on behalf of the state. Yeah? These are the kind of characters that you find in ICHR.
Right. This is one of the key criticism. It's not really criticism, it's more like a recommendation that came out from the ASEAN People's Forum is if ICHR want to be taken seriously as a human rights body within the Southeast Asian region, it has to restructure in the way it manages itself. Right now, it's very top-down instead of bottom-out, because it is an intergovernmental body instead of like, as in like we can see in European Union, where it's a what's the word? Supranational body where the power is not concentrated within the top
state actors.
The state actors, but instead it is distributed widely within the people themselves.
So aside from this, what are the other recommendations that came out of the APF?
There were a lot
The
of
declarations I heard was issued by the end of the APF.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't look through the whole declaration, and I heard that it is like a 9 to 10 pages declaration, so it is huge. But what I can say is, the ASEAN Youth Forum, because I attended the ASEAN Youth Forum as well, contributed 2 lines within that declaration, which is we want the government, or ASEAN to endorse the Yangon Declaration coming up from the ASEAN Youth Forum and to implement it.
So, for the benefit of our listeners, the ASEAN Youth Forum is where it's held concurrently or maybe before the ASEAN People's Forum, where the youth gathers and also have their own declaration, which eventually was submitted to the ASEAN People's Forum as well. So these are and Arlene played an important part in drafting the ASEAN Youth Forum declaration. So for the APF, they have accepted two of the things that the declaration from the youth states. So of course the youth session will be covered in our next session tomorrow. So do stay tuned if you want to hear about the ASEAN Youth Forum. But yeah, right now, let's going back to the topic of the ASEAN People's Forum. But what do you think is the future of the ASEAN People's Forum? What lies ahead?
I think this is just my personal opinion, but I think the ASEAN People's Forum need to be a strong pressure group within the civil society organization. I think for us, and we have to take note that next year Malaysia will be the host for the ASEAN People's Forum, and I believe if we want to take ourselves seriously and we want ASEAN to take themselves seriously, we need to be a strong pressure group. When I say pressure, as in like we need to really criticize what the governments or the ASEAN, Southeast Asian countries, in terms of how it relates itself to ASEAN and the ASEAN Human Rights Charter, and also maybe to question certain provisions of the Charter. For example, the controversial provisions of consensus and non-interference.
So I guess maybe among the ASEAN People's Forum, there's a consensus that there shouldn't be this kind of ASEAN way or whatnot. Is that so? Did you guys discuss about that?
I'm not
non-interference.
I'm not sure about other workshops or the whole general idea of it, but I can say that a lot of the civil society representatives that I got to know, they are envisioning a more democratic, a more people-centered ASEAN Youth, not just ASEAN People's Forum, as in like ASEAN itself. So far, ASEAN People's Forum is the only regional venue that this civil society representative can voice up their concerns. And I feel that greater spaces is needed to voice up such important concerns within the general public of Southeast Asian countries.
Yeah, so there are plans now to institutionalize ASEAN Youth Forum. But what about ASEAN People's Forum? Is it a formal body that consults the ASEAN Summit? Like, would the ASEAN Summit be obliged to take on its recommendations?
Unfortunately, it is not. They are not obliged to take up their recommendation. Although the ASEAN People's Forum is working hard towards lobbying of their declarations to the ASEAN Secretariat themselves. What the ASEAN People's Forum can do in terms of trying to get more attention by ASEAN itself is to lobby the international media and international public on why this is important, not just to the civil society or to the Southeast Asian people, but also to the general, as in the general public in the world.
So is there any important message or takeaway that you got out of the APF?
I think I left with a positive feeling, as in, like, I think the Malaysian Civil Society organization, I hope that we will do a much better sort of approach in trying to continue the processes that has happened in Myanmar. And I think it might be a rather slow process, but it is a process that we need to do, and in terms of trying to liberate and trying to democratize ASEAN itself.
Right. And you also mentioned to me about how you see even Myanmar domestic issue of the Rohingya conflict transpires in your fellow Burmese activists as well. Could you share a little about that?
Yeah.
So it's not a universal thing that, Rohingya should not be oppressed or whatnot.
Yeah. The Rohingya ethnic issue and ethnic conflict is a very interesting phenomena happened during the ASEAN People's Forum. I mean, the general sort of consensus is it is a huge human rights violation by the government and by some of the society, and it's something that people need to be more concerned, the Myanmar people. And what I noticed during the ASEAN People's Forum, there were two camps of sort of views. And during one of the sessions that I moderated on the Youth Challenges workshop, I can't remember the whole sentence, I was quite impressed with the Myanmar youth activists, political activists, in fact. They were saying, when they were asked about the Rohingya issue, they said that the government need to strengthen its rule of law, not in terms of sort of curbing, not in terms of trying to allow these human rights violation practices to go, but actually to create a more diverse and peaceful society within that region. But then I also hear some very racist comment within the society, within some of the people there, as in, like, they equate the Rohingya people as in of a lower social status or ethnic status than themselves, and I feel that this is something that should be addressed.
So I personally think that as host countries, very often the domestic issues will be brought up. And while we see how what has transpired in Myanmar, we hope that in Malaysia, before next year, either there are issues that are significantly addressed within before next year, or I think it might also be a good avenue to let people discover what is actually happening locally. I think MH370 has provided quite a bit of exposure on that. But I think we are all pretty excited about the development that's going on in ASEAN region now. Yeah. And is there anything else you would like to share?
I guess what I like to share, as in, like, my take on the ASEAN People's Forum, is also important for civil society to not just focus on the symptom of the problem. Like a lot of the discussion were focusing more on the violation of migrants, workers, sex workers, LGBT's persecution, and freedom of religion, and a host other human rights violation. I think that is great, but at the same time, it is important that civil society to go towards the root causes of why this is happening. And I think the root causes is pretty point blank, which is the structure, the political, economic, and social structure of the Southeast Asian nation. We are very much a top-down sort of bodies of government countries. We have governments are making the decision, and they are not being transparent towards their own population. And in terms of economically, a lot of the wealth and inequalities, a lot of the wealth are centered within the higher strata of the society, and inequality is rampant in Southeast Asian region. And these are the main root causes that as well as politically, a majority of Southeast Asian nations are not democratic at all. And these are the root causes that reflect all the symptoms that is happening in this region.
Right. So I definitely agree with you in like how we should look at the causes. But what about the solutions? Like, does ASEAN People Forum comes out with a permanent secretariat to make sure that, you know, things are collaboratively done regionally to address issues?
Actually, I'm not sure about that. So I cannot really comment about whether they have formed a permanent secretary to ASEAN or not.
All right. Nevertheless, thank you very much, Arlene, for
thank
sharing
you.
with us about the ASEAN People's Forum.
Okay,
Next
welcome.
on, we will have some sharings from the Bersih People Tribunal by Sin Yu, who is one of our Bersih Steering Committee. Stay tuned.